Hello, everyone. As I'm going deeper into my study on what the future holds for all of us, I'm delighted to have with us Ravi Mariwala, who is the founder and managing director at Smaart Water, the integrated and holistic water solutions company. He's also been a founding member of the Technology and Innovation Advisory Group at the Center for Human Rights and International Justice at Stanford, and also been an adjunct professor at ICT, the Institute of Chemical Tech. His main areas of expertise, I would say his lifelines are water, sustainability, and innovation. He's also an avid sailor. He's been sailing for more than 45 years. He holds a PhD in chemical engineering from the University of Delaware. And I've been introduced to him via 4 or 5 different people, and they all have only wonderful things to say about him. They say he's most accessible and a true expert and genuinely passionate about his area of expertise. So today he's here to share his passion, his expertise, and his love for innovation, sustainability, and water with us. So thank you, Ravi Mariwala, for doing this for us.
Thanks, Vibha. Thanks for having me out here. Very happy to contribute any which way I can to better the world. That's all I would say.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's get started with just sort of laying the context for this conversation. You know, when we thought about writing this book, we said, who's going to be interested in understanding the future? You know, so from your vantage point, from where you sit, why is it even important to have this conversation? Why think about what the future holds for all of us?
I think that's a great question. And I briefly touched upon it in an earlier conversation with somebody. And, I reflect back. I think to look at the future, we need to understand the past also. So let's understand the past. Then the past 50 years, how things have changed dramatically. And in all fronts, you see that there have been massive changes. I think one of the largest changes which we currently see all the time is digitization. I think when you were talking about 70s and 80s, when the computers were coming up and what's happening today is a totally different story. So the digitization and the digital space has done just amazing transformations all across the world. The second important part, which I feel, is climate and climate change. And climate change, the effects are being felt, though the whole process has started about in 1800s, early 1800s. But I think the acceleration over the last 40 years or 50 years has been enormous. And I think this is one of the major concerns which I have. And there is a lot to be done in this particular space and how it's going to affect us going forward. And that's of concern for the future as we see it. The third part is, what's happening is that the world has seen the largest number of humans ever in its history in the last 100 years. And that is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on our environment and other issues. And this needs to be grappled with. How are we going to feed them? How are we going to maintain the hygiene with them? What are the implications which we are going to have with them? How is this intervention of such a large amount of people going to be affecting our environment? How do we look at the security? How do we live, which is more effective and more contributing to the society in general? So this dimension leads us to many questions. So if I was to summarize the three major forces which are molding the future are digitization to a great extent, climate change, I would put it as number one, and the enormous increase in population and disparity. And I think that's going to really define how we look at work going forward and what does work mean going forward. And we can take on and work from there,
Great. Okay, that's a wonderful context. You sort of delineated three primary influences in the future, and I read somewhere on your website that your mission is to build a sustainable future of abundance. I really like the way you've coined that. Do you want to share what that means for you from your perspective? What is a sustainable future, and what do you define as abundance?
Yeah, so I think let's touch upon the abundance part first. Okay, abundance is a very relative concept, as I say. I think what may be abundant for you may not be abundant for somebody else. All right, and as you progress through your life, I think the value of abundance also changes for you. But to me, the most biggest driver for abundance was the concept of abundance was uh, two things. One is, I think, the human tendencies want, real without realizing what is needed. So the abundance is, hey, what is abundance for me? I have this enough, which is going to be helping me for the next 10 years. That's great abundance for me. So it's a very psychological concept. Second thing is, if you know that you have abundance out here, it gives you one of the stress relievers. It's one of the stress relievers for you. So if I say if I have abundant amount of water, for example, which I'm most familiar with, I'm saying I don't have to bother about it. I don't have to think about it. Okay. And then I have to just maintain it and look after it in a very positive manner. All right. So abundance gives you a certain level of kind of calmness and a psychological support. And that's what I mean by abundant. What I mean by sustainable is that I should be able to access the abundance day in and day out without fearing it and in a rational manner. Okay. And I should not be looking at saying that, hey, I don't have this or I don't have that. It should be somehow working in a way where my intervention becomes very little. So if I was to take an example of both abundance of water, which becomes a very of sustainable water, then I would say is that let us say that if I have a apartment complex or a house, then why don't we incorporate something like rain harvesting and groundwater recharge, depending on your water needs, into the whole design concept itself. Okay, this doesn't require necessarily a lot of money. What it requires putting your mind appropriately across to that and thinking a little differently for us to do that particular part. So that's where I kind of look at the idea of sustainable abundance.
Okay. And when you're talking about sustainable abundance as a concept, it can be obviously applied. You talk about in the context of water, but similarly, we can talk about in the context of so all many resources that are
Right.
slowly but surely
That's,
diminishing.
yeah. That can be talked across various things. What I say is sustainable abundance across, say, food. Food is getting to be very important,
Hmm.
and food security is getting to be extremely important. So we can talk about sustainable abundance in food also. For that
Okay.
matter.
Great. Okay, but so since water is your subject, and I also read somewhere you said, blue is the new green.
Yeah,
So let's talk about a little bit about water. So what
sure.
is the water problem? What is going on in the water space, and where do you see this going? Not 20, 30 years from now, just in the short term, in the 5, 10-year future, what are you seeing
Yeah.
as issues in the water space?
Yeah. So I think if you're looking at water space, you have to look at from both demand side and supply side. Okay. So where is the demand coming from? And today, whichever way you dice the demand, I think what we are pretty clear across the world, at least minimum 70% of water is going to go towards agriculture. Okay. In India, that's very skewed. It's skewed that we are almost about 86, 87% usage of water goes towards agriculture. The balance goes for potable use, which is the humans consume for various activities to keep themselves healthy, hydrated, clean, the hygiene maintenance, etc. And balance, kind of equally divided between potable use and industries. And industries require water. Now, what has transpired because of this is that food security is going to be necessary. So, how do we manage water for food? That nexus has to be really addressed well because that is the largest chunk of water. But
Yeah,
that
agree
also is,
completely.
yeah, and
Okay.
that is also
Mm.
highly political issue. For example, in India, we hardly pay anything for water. The agri sector hardly pays anything for water. Majority of the economic brunt for water is borne by the industry. So I think that's a little skewed. And we have had traditionally a very deep-rooted agri system whereby we are still using some of the older ways of doing things like flood irrigations, improper use of fertilizers, etc., to get the yields and performance. And that is really affecting us in water. So today, our water efficiency is about 45% of the world water efficiency usage for agriculture purposes. Okay, so that's something which we really need to address. And what's happening is that we are getting a lot of rain. We're getting about 4,000 cubic kilometer of rain. Half of it goes off as environmental flows, but the rest of it we are managing quite poorly. So that is something which we really need to focus on to be able to manage both groundwater and surface water, which is going to yield water for the population growth. I think till 2040, what we see is that India's population is still going to be growing. It's reaching the peak at that level, and then it's going to start declining. So there is a geographic disparity in that. And if we have to grow and improve the standard of living of people, water is a very essential part of it for industrial use, for increasing the jobs, increasing the industrialization, and increasing the economic well-being of our polity. So doing that, I think we'll have to play a very important role on addressing all the three sectors, and those to be addressed in very, very different ways because their problems are very different.
Okay, so can we take each one of these and see how you think of solutions in all these areas?
Yeah.
We can start with when you said the imbalance between agri use and industry usage.
Yeah.
How does this, and who is the onus then on the government to come in and say let's make a who is the stakeholder that is involved in this?
Yeah, so I think if I look at let's look at each of the spaces. So if I was to look at the agri space, I think we have a central government policy, but implementation of policy and the local rules are done by the state government, where they're providing free power, almost free power and free water to the agri sector. Now, the agri policies in a way were such that the cropping patterns were very, very, very improper with the regions what they'd selected. Traditionally, India has had millets, oil seeds, and pulses as their major crops, which require lesser water because all of them were rain fed. Subsequent to the British invasion, I think just to generate the revenues, they moved a lot towards rice and wheat, which became the crops of the 20th century. 20th century. And as a result of it, they are water guzzling crops. And a lot of the land under cultivation came to that, and we forgot what to work with millets. If you see, currently there is a whole campaign on millets, which consume far less water compared to rice and wheat. So that's something which needs to be done, and the supply chain needs to be done. The second point, oil seeds and pulses are also very important because large majority of the people in India are still vegetarian. So the main source of protein is either dairy or pulses. And these are very essential for our food security. So those also need to be cultivated. And the third thing is oil seeds. We still import some of the edible oils, which are very central to our cooking. And so when you're looking at that, one of the solutions would be to let's target, say, 2% to 3% saving of water in the agri space every year through cropping pattern changes. Second thing is implementation of fair irrigation practices and training of that. And the third thing, which I think I'm just scratching the surface and I understand, is your soil conditionings. Our soil is devoid of a lot of the nutrients because of over farming and not replenishment. And I think that's going to matter a lot going forward. This will take care of the agri sector very well. If I come to the industrial sector, industry has already recognized a lot of things. It is going to require more water. So industries are doing something like zero liquid discharge. There is a big thrust towards it where they reuse and recycle water. Second thing, what they're doing a lot, which I see, is that they're harvesting water and giving back a lot more to the nature than what they really use. And that's getting to be a very important part also. The third thing which industry will have to do a bit is in terms of looking at their processes holistically so that water consumption could come down. You must have heard these kind of things where, a cotton t-shirt requires 1,000 liters of water to be produced, etc. Can we relook at and re-engineer and rethink about processes which consume less water? So, for example, one of the challenges we are having with water right now is for cooling towers, where people are thinking, can we avoid any kind of chemical dosage in the cooling tower water so that the quality of water is better, it stays longer, and how can we enhance the longevity and reuse of water, for example. So those kind of interventions are going to be there, but water is going to be required for the industry for any kind of economic growth which is happening. Okay.
Okay. So you thank you for explaining that the
Yeah.
agri sector and what can move and industry and how they can shift. Where does the government come into all this? What is the role
Yeah.
of
So the role of government is twofold. And one is, and I'm a strong proponent of a couple of things. One is pricing water. I think water pricing is very essential. Without that, the behavioral changes will not be there. Second thing is equitable allocation of water. And the
Mhm.
third philosophical question is, whom does water belong to?
Mhm.
Okay. I think these are three fundamental points if the government can work on, and that may involve things like building either decentralized networks, building infrastructure. Technology is not surprisingly that much of an issue in India. It's overseas is the issue, but that's for a different reason. So on and so forth. Then I think government can really focus on these three things, if I was to say, then I think it could make a lot of difference. Economics, I say, because I think we are not pricing water at all appropriately. And if we start doing that, we will start realizing the right price of water, and that will help change behaviors. That's, I think, very important. Equitable distribution is that today we are seeing that the poorest of the poor are paying the most for water. They are
Mhm.
supplied by tankers, which is very expensive water. So equitable distribution, which will require proper infrastructure, investment in proper infrastructure and maintenance of infrastructure is going to be very important. And the third question, when I say whom does the water belong to, is that there are cases where the most rich and the richest people, they want to consume water at any price. But
Mhm.
there is a limit to it, that we have to put a limit to it and says that, okay, you may want to pay the price, etc. But at certain point, the water is not going to be given to you beyond a certain amount. I think those kind of controls would be very helpful. And the infrastructure, which is involving multiple agencies, would be nice for the government to facilitate in certain ways in building pipelines, in building water reservoirs, in distribution networks, sewage plants, which are common sewage plants where economic sense is present out there. So that's where the government's role would be very important to have a look at it.
Is there a country in the world, like a case study, that you would say that this is a good benchmark for India to follow, and what have they done to solve this water crisis?
Yeah. So there are two countries which I have read a lot about, and third one, and two more countries which are more populous in these. Israel and Singapore have looked at water in great detail, and I've had the most amount of reading which has been done out there. The other one is Netherlands and Spain. I think those are the other two countries which are quite remarkable also. If I was to look at Israel, is a very good pilot case. It's got a population of about 8 million people, 8 to 9 million people. It's water. It's a pretty dry state in the sense that it receives very little water, and they've done some amazing work of that. Today, Israel charges the same amount for drinking water as well as for agri water, and that has really forced them to develop technologies on agriculture, starting with tissue cultures, small trees, drip irrigation, water management practices, etc. So you see, what has the economics done? It has really created a
Hmm.
huge ecosystem around it.
So
They
you're
have
saying the
used,
minute you price it, the minute there's a price component to it, then automatically they'll move towards figuring out the engineering side of it
like,
to
yeah,
be more economical about their usage. Today it's a
yeah,
free resource and therefore it's being
yeah.
loosely used. Okay,
Yeah,
understood.
and they've used the geopolitics extremely well. I think they had the war in 1967, and they got the Golan Heights, which is their major water reservoir out here, the Sea of Galilee, and which is providing water through gravity because it's at an elevation through the whole country. And they
Hmm.
also had a very good arrangement with Jordan, whereby Jordan wanted to put up large desalination plants near Aqaba in the southern desert, which they said, we will put it up, but we will you finance our plant, but we will provide you water from gravity so you get cheaper water, by which they were able to do agriculture in that area, in the southern part of Israel, the south of Dead Sea. So, they played the geopolitics very well. And then they invented a lot on the sewage, whereby they treat sewage to an extent. And that is quite nutritious for agricultural purposes. So they provide treated sewage to agri purposes. And before the war in Gaza, they were always wanting more of sewage water, and they would provide potable water at a much lower cost for the agri purposes out there. So they did a very interesting thing. Singapore has looked at a very different model where they're doing a lot of desalination, and there's of strategic importance to that because they learned about it from Malaysia, where Malaysia was controlling their water flows, and they've taken a fabulous 60 to 100-year view, whereby say they want to be self-sufficient with water. They're looking at desalination, recycle and reuse. 25% of the water which comes back to them is completely recycled and reused. And they use a lot of good technology to do that. But that comes at the price of a higher carbon footprint in terms of power consumption and energy consumption. But I think they needed to do that. So that was the need of the hour for them. Uh, Spain has worked very well in recycling, which is a larger country, larger population compared to Israel. And Netherlands has also done very well in terms of managing their water resources. And especially during COVID times, they did some remarkable work. And they have basically said that your sewers and the sewage water is the new source of so-called quote unquote data, which tells you a lot about the state of society. They were the first ones to be able to predict COVID epidemics because they were looking at the COVID virus residues in the sewage water. So I think these are some of the examples we can learn from.
Okay, all right. So there seems to be enough work done globally, and there's enough examples for emulate or at least borrow from.
Right.
Okay, if you were to describe sort of a utopian future for India, what would it look like? You know, what would be going on 5, 7, 10 years in the future if they got it right? What is a utopian situation?
The utopian situation would be that there would not be rapid urbanization. In fact, people would love to stay in their villages where they are. The quality of life improving. They have easy and ample access to your basic utilities and resources in terms of water, power, food, road, communication. So we are at every point we are somewhere on this space out here. And I think the cleaner air, that's one the kind of thing which would be there. And one of the very important things and lessons we can learn is, today one of the largest problems in West has been the emerging micropollutants in water, air, and this is a manifestation of excessive use of drugs, excessive use of pesticides. And there is a ways we can learn from there whereby we can start reducing the use of those. And those contaminate the water a lot, they contaminate the food systems a lot. So those kind of things which would look at it, where we would be able to handle those, leapfrog it, so that we are able to work it in a particular way. That's how I look at it.
Okay, so you're essentially saying this great migration that a lot of people are predicting, if it doesn't happen, then there's a more equitable distribution of the population across the country, and then there's no overbearing load on certain pockets, which is being
yeah, that would be really nice, and psychologically what I've seen, it's very anecdotal evidence, but people want to go back to where they came from. The migration is only a case because of their economic requirements, otherwise they want to go back. So I've had two cases. One is outside of Coimbatore, where a lot of people want to come back to their roots and where they came from. And here also in Satara district in Maharashtra, we have seen a reverse migration from cities where people are going back because they are beginning to see the presence of water and other things and accessibility, which has become much easier for them.
Okay, absolutely. Okay, you started in the beginning of the conversation talking about digitization as a trend that you see shaping the future. Is there a trend of digitization or AI? Is there any impact of that in the climate or sustainability space from where you see it? Can we use these technologies to solve for sustainability?
Yeah, I think AI, what is AI going to give us for sustainability? It's a question which has already gone on in my mind a lot. One of the things which I find is that predictability of weather and climate. I think these are some of the things which AI can really help with because it takes away a couple of risk factors which are related and affecting our lives on a daily basis. It takes away the risk factors with respect to food production. It takes away the risks or reduces the risk factors which are associated with famines and droughts. Okay, that's another part which is kind of coming up. It takes away the factor and uncertainty and the fear about going somewhere, enjoying somewhere, etc. So I think AI and ML would play a huge role in this particular part. The other thing is getting data
Mm.
about various places. I think there also the AI ML would play a significant role in this particular way. Uh, the other one, there's very interesting things which are coming up, and these are smaller ones, but they make a lot of difference. For example, we're working on a project where we looked at if you can measure the most minimal parameters of water, and you can use an AI or ML method to predict whether water is clean and safe to drink or not. Those kind of applications would be very interesting to look at,
Mm.
in terms of how you can do a predictive measure for that. And another things which I kind of saw just out of personal interest is, can we develop landscapes or can we print agricultural farms using AI ML so as to be having optimal water consumption, optimal nutritional output, and so on and so forth. So I think we are basically learning the tools. Once we learn the tools, I think we'll have to stretch our imaginations to see what other applications can come up with it.
Okay, okay. But it sounds like a lot of metrics could come out of this. A lot of mapping
Yeah,
could come out of, a lot of
yeah,
predictability could come out
yeah,
of just
right,
sheer data crunching,
right,
able to predict trends, and then that could definitely
sure,
solve.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I want to touch a little bit upon your interest in engineering solutions and product design. So
yeah,
if you could share with us, any of the innovations or technologies that you're working on currently for the
yeah.
future, and where are you seeing product design evolve? You did the PhD in chemical engineering so many years ago. How are you seeing the space evolve going forward?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question as to what is happening uh, ahead. Now, there are a couple of trends which are very evident, at least in engineering, which I would like to share. I think, and that forms the basis on which we can predict what things are happening. The couple of things which are happening in engineering today are that they're becoming highly interdisciplinary fields. And what I mean by that is, you're not just engineers doing the job. You have engineers, they're working with scientists. Science and engineering are two different things. So even chemical engineers today are working a lot with biologists, they're working a lot with material scientists, they're working a lot with physicists. There is also an influx of a lot of social scientists coming into play.
Mm.
You have sociologists, political scientists coming into play, historians coming into play, um, ecologists coming into play, environmental sciences people coming into play, because there is a lot of things which are interdisciplinary. Doctors coming into play because there's a lot of application of engineering in the medicine also today. So it's become a very multidisciplinary field today, and as a result of it, I think one of my pet projects or pet projects is basically working with engineering and deriving nature-based solutions. Now,
Mm.
nature-based solutions are very sustainable in a way if you can do it well.
Mm.
For example, if you look at outside of Kolkata, they have nature-based solutions for their sewage treatment, and those kind of things are very, very fascinating, very
Yes.
important
Can
to
you
look.
can you share that? What does that mean? What is nature-based solutions?
So if you look at it, when before the populations were very large in the world, where did the sewage go? Simple question. We don't know how to do that, but then there was an innate observation and empirical understanding that you created certain kind of water bodies or wetlands which could handle the sewage very well.
Mm.
With the advent of sciences, technology, we are able to measure these data very well. And these data which really shows that, okay, the outputs which are coming out are very, very fascinating. The nature itself is able to adapt and solve the problems of pollution, etc. So how can we engineer them so that they are smaller in size, they become more efficient, they can become more productive to be able to do this particular part? If I look at something like medicines, okay, the medicines earlier were people were looking at is making through synthetic organic chemistry. That still will continue, but Are there biological systems? Or if you look at tobacco plants, can we grow the medicines in tobacco plants? You know what earlier Ayurveda used to do with empirical observations and empirical evidence. Can we give a little bit more fundamental basis to that? And that would be really very interesting to do. Other thing which coming out is that you see a lot of seaweed which is growing wild in waters and really grows very well where there are runoffs from farmland and farm waters. Can we cultivate them and use that as a source of food to feed the world? So I
Okay.
think
Building
those
like a circular economy.
circular economy, yeah, and they serve a lot of these problems. And technically, what happens is, if I was to put it in chemical engineering principles, that we have something called entropy, which is the natural method, by natural way of people wanting to, nature wanting to create more chaotic systems or distributed systems, and we have to put in energy to be able to collect that back and put it together. Okay, so there are certain technologies which can help us do that very nicely, and they get their energy from the sun, which we have, which is of course free of cost as of now. So that's how we look at it. So nature-based solutions is a big thing which I feel would be very interesting to look at.
Okay. And you touched upon the interdisciplinary aspect when you said, there will be doctors coming in and so many people at play. When you meant at play, is this when a government or a large corporation is designing a solution, you're saying this is when they would bring in these different factions?
Yeah, I think at every level you are going to be requiring an interdisciplinary team. If I'm looking at a policy level, we require enormous amount of interdisciplinary work because it's going to be affect people. They're going to be affecting people. Let's take an example of healthcare, okay, and say disease control. Uh, whom do you want to whom do you want on board? Who solved the problem of COVID today? Was it just the scientists? Was it engineers? Was it policymakers? What is it, sociologists? Who was it? I think it was a combination of all of them which came to solve that problem. So I think that various understanding, various stakeholders came together. They put their ideas, their learning together, and were learned to work with each other was very important to solve the problem. Going forward, that's the same part which is going to happen. So I think that's the mantra going forward.
Okay. If you now I want to move a little bit on, since we're touching upon this chemical engineering space. If you had to go back today and get a degree, you spent so many years studying chemical engineering. What do you think, now that you know so much about the world and you know where the world is shifting to, what do you think you would study today? If someone had to study and you're picking up, what should I study? What is an interesting field to study?
I think there are lots of fields which are very interesting to study, and I follow the adage is that whatever is where you feel really connected with, you should do that. So there are a couple of things which I would really love to study at this point in time. Is I would certainly do engineering. There's no two ways about that. I would do a lot more of biology, which is very fascinating, and I would do a lot more of behavioral economics. I think those are really fascinating fields which are kind of emerging out here. And the main thing which I would learn to do is develop an ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Because knowledge, the rate at which the knowledge is growing in the world is huge. And the only way we can keep up with this is the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, and be open to ideas in terms of what's happening and connecting out there. So that
Okay.
would be really fascinating to do that.
Okay.
And in the other side of this, my left brain or right brain, I forget which one it is, the creative side, I certainly would spend more time understanding art and sculpture and things like that.
Okay, so you would want to go back and get a rather interdisciplinary education then. You want engineering and
Yeah,
science, you want economics, so you want to be in the humanities department, and you
yeah,
want art, sculpture, all of that.
yeah,
So you,
very
you
much so.
would pick like a 2 or 3 degrees of my majors and minor combination.
Yeah.
Having done your PhD in chemical engineering, and obviously you understand the curriculum that they have in universities, etc. If you were to advocate for curriculum change in engineering or chemical engineering specifically, what do you think universities, schools, etc., should be doing, and how should they be shifting as they train people? Because on one end, it's the expertise that you built as a chemical engineer, but there's also all this chatter about, hey, people need to be interdisciplinary. So, how does a university balance that?
So there are a couple of things. I think basic engineering education is very important for your skill sets to be developed and your basic way of thinking to be developed. That could be a mainstream of thinking. For engineers, especially, I would suggest that you should have at least about 15% of your credits coming through humanities.
Mm-hmm.
I think we engineers are very cut and dry. We are emotionless. And today, empathy is something which is enormously lacking in engineers. And even so, more with your computer engineers and computer scientists. I think the empathy part is singularly the most important thing which engineering curriculum today needs to impart. And empathy comes through various forms. It can come through engaging with, humanities, because it brings in a very subjective discord into the whole curriculum. It comes in through arts. It comes in through history. And one of the other point which is very important for an engineering curriculum is working on the ground to understand how engineering affects people. At the end of it, the purpose of engineering is to better the society. And I think just sitting in the AC room and doing problem solving is not going to help you. You need to be on the ground and spend at least 6 months to a year to be
Okay.
able to do that and go through that
So
before
the
you.
empathy quotient you feel needs to be engineered in the
Yeah,
engineering.
yeah, that's
To
what
do
it
that, they
is.
could introduce like 15-20% of a humanities sort of curriculum.
Yes, very important.
Okay. You'd already talked about skills, you talked about learning, unlearning, and relearning. Anything else on the skills you'd like to add anything on futuristic sort of skills?
I think AI is going to be a game changer, but we
Mhm.
don't know how to deal with it yet. So I think the skills in that area are going to be very essential for us to learn and have the ability to learn skills. So I think there are a lot of resources available today for us to learn these skills and understand the skills. So just have the ability to learn those skills and work with it and such things because
Have a learning mindset.
yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
Any thoughts on new careers emerging? Because you've been around and you've seen industry from the inside out, and you have seen in your lifespan careers come and go. What are you sort of seeing as careers, new frontier, new careers emerging in areas, industries, not necessarily engineering only, but just generally from a worldview perspective?
Yeah. So one of the things which is happening, which I'm seeing very much is, communication with a strong background in a particular field. I'm most well versed with engineering, so I'll tell you about one of the things which I'm seeing very pleasantly coming across is there are people who are really got a strong background in either biology, physics, chemistry, and they're writing about very difficult concepts in a very common term and basically becoming journalists which communicate these complex concepts and the impacts of it to the to the masses. I think which is a great way of getting that across, that things are not bad as they seem to be, because sometimes otherwise the media swings in such a way, but these beacons of hope really bring in rationality to the whole concourse or discourse, so I think that's a great career which is emerging. So today I'm seeing a lot of people getting a degree in either biology, chemistry, engineering, and becoming journalists after that, and focusing on science, technology, journalism. That's one of the things which kind of came up. Uh, Engineers to build things, I think you can focus on that, but that's going to be a hard work. But
Mhm.
I think the new methods of engineering, like 3D printing, etc., is bringing in some very new and interesting opportunities. Okay, you're working with either materials development, you're working with application development, you're implementing things on ground. So you can work at various aspects of it in this case. Your traditional methods of your consultants, etc., are still there, but they will be irrelevant after a while, I feel, if they really don't reinvent themselves and get really hands-on experience on how to do things out there. That
Okay.
is something which is going to be quite important to look at.
Okay.
That's what I feel.
So there's there's a lot using tactile. Being tactile seems to be one of the big field the themes.
Yeah, yeah,
The empathy that comes from it, just sort of more hands-on being on the ground. Okay.
yeah.
Last question, and then when we close this, is just, are you generally optimistic about the future? There's people who, they say, oh, climate change is going to come. We don't know what kind of world we're going to live in. I don't want my children to inherit this future. And then the people are very optimistic. So where do you stand on this spectrum, and why? Like, what is it that makes you one of either?
Yeah. So I think I'm very optimistic.
You're very optimistic. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when you see a lot of these things, what I feel is that you hear a lot of media. Now, media is also in the business, in the space of business. They also want to sell, most of the time they want to sell, my favorite line is, they sell fear, vanity, and sex. That's the biggest things they sell out here. But I think at the end of it, we should sit down and think rationally as to what is going to be out there. And history teaches us a lot of things. Okay. History taught us that in the early 1900s, they said that, oh, we're not going to have enough food for doing things. But then people are thinking about it, and they came up with a Haber-Bosch process to make ammonia, which changed the whole dimension of food security. Okay. There are lots of good pockets of things which are happening. People are getting access to water, etc. So that's why I've always maintained that future is optimistic. Go and see on the ground. Don't get carried away by either way. Make a systematic assessment of what's happening and see how we want to work at it. The key point on that is that you have to put your mind to it, and you will have to work towards it to see a better future. You cannot just sit in an AC or in an armchair say that the future is going to be bad. Okay, I think you can look at the future to be great also, and live in the present. That's what I say. Enjoy the food, enjoy the wine, enjoy the music, enjoy the arts, and enjoy the whole particular path. So,
okay, terrific. All right.
yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this, and terrific insights.
My pleasure.
Everything I heard about you completely rang true in this interview. Thank you. Your expertise, humility, and brilliance shone through the conversation. Truly appreciate the time you have spent with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Vibha, for giving me this opportunity. And please feel free to reach out if I can be of any other help.
Absolutely will do. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.